Maya's been wonderful, but let's be honest, she's never really understood the technical side. This is family legacy work. The words came through the wall like a cold draft under a door. Clear enough to understand. Quiet enough that Maya Thornhill wasn't supposed to hear them. She stood in the hallway outside Colin's home office, a mug of tea cooling in her hands, and listened to her husband discuss her irrelevance with his daughter. The conversation continued on the other side of that wall. Something about formalizing the partnership structure, about being realistic, about not wanting to hurt Maya's feelings but needing to acknowledge who the business actually belonged to. Simone's voice, confident and careful. Colin's voice, agreeing. Both of them speaking about Maya as if she were a well-meaning bystander to a story she hadn't helped write. Maya didn't move, didn't knock, didn't push open the door and announce herself with the truth still hanging in the air between them. She stood there and felt the tea go cold against her palms, felt something shift and settle in her chest. Not anger, not yet, but something colder and more patient than anger. Recognition, maybe. Confirmation of a pattern she'd been trying not to see for months. When the conversation inside turned to scheduling and logistics, Maya walked back downstairs. She poured the tea down the sink. She rinsed the mug, dried it, put it back in the cabinet. She sat at the kitchen table in the dark and let the silence teach her what she needed to know. They didn't realize she'd heard. That was the first piece of power. They thought her silence meant acceptance. That was the second. Maya had built 17 years of her life on the belief that patience was a form of strength, that the people who lasted weren't the ones who demanded immediate recognition, but the ones who showed up, did the work, and trusted that their value would become obvious over time. She had watched her mother burn through relationships with the opposite approach, volcanic eruptions of need and ego, demands for acknowledgement that left nothing but ash and distance in their wake. Maya had promised herself she would be different, steadier, more sustainable, the kind of person people could depend on because she didn't require constant validation to keep showing up. It had worked too, or at least she'd thought it had. She'd met Colin when he was unraveling. Fresh off a divorce that had gutted his confidence and left him with a 9-year-old daughter who barely spoke to him, Colin had been brilliant in his work and utterly lost everywhere else. He restored old buildings for a living. Painstaking historical preservation, the kind of work that required seeing what a structure had been and coaxing it back to its original integrity. But he couldn't seem to apply that same patience to his own life. He missed appointments, forgot to eat, worked 16-hour days and wondered why his daughter looked at him like a stranger. Maya had been working as a project coordinator for the historical society that contracted his firm. She'd seen past the genius, in disarray routine to the man underneath. Someone who desperately wanted to be present for his daughter, but didn't know how to translate love into the practical language of showing up. So Maya had started helping. Small things at first. Forwarding him school emails he'd missed. Color. Coding his calendar. Reminding him gently that Simone's recital was Thursday, not Friday, and that 12-year-olds remember when their fathers don't show up. Colin had looked at her like she was performing miracles. Maya had smiled and said it wasn't complicated. You just had to pay attention to what mattered. That became the contract. Unspoken, unwritten, but absolute, Maya would pay attention to what mattered, and in return, her attention would matter. She would hold the center, and the center would hold her. She became his wife. Then she became the gravitational force that kept their household from flying apart. She learned Simone's moods and silences, learned to translate between father and daughter, learned to create space for them to love each other without the interference of old wounds. She remembered which friends were currently acceptable and which were in exile. She navigated Simone's vegetarian phase, her vegan phase, her mercifully brief experiment with raw food. She knew when to talk and when to just sit nearby, a presence that said, "Without words, you are not alone, and I am not leaving." And with Colin's work, Maya became something more than a wife and something other than an employee. She had a mind for systems, for seeing how pieces connected, and she turned that lens on his business. She streamlined his client communication. She built relationships with historical societies and preservation boards, not through manipulation but through genuine attention. She remembered names. She sent thank you notes. She followed up on conversations with thoughtful ideas. When Colin won the contract to restore the old courthouse downtown, it was because Maya had spent 6 months cultivating a relationship with the board president, learning what she cared about, positioning Colin as someone who understood not just buildings but their meaning. Colin knew this. He thanked her for it, often and sincerely, when they were alone. But in public, in professional contexts, Maya's contributions became weather instead of architecture. She was his support system, his better half, the woman behind the man, phrases that sounded warm and appreciative but erased the specificity of what she actually did. Maya told herself it didn't matter. She wasn't doing it for recognition. She was doing it because this was what partnership looked like when you stripped away ego. This was love as action instead of performance. But there were moments, brief and quickly suppressed, when Maya felt the edge of something else. When a colleague asked Colin how he balanced such demanding work with family responsibilities, and Colin said he'd gotten better at time management. When Simone gave her high school graduation speech and thanked her father for always believing in her, for never giving up, and Maya sat in the audience clapping until her hands burned. When the architecture magazine profiled Colin's firm and described him as a man who had rebuilt his life after divorce through determination and vision, and Maya's name appeared once, Thornhill credits his wife, Maya, with keeping the home fires burning while he pursues his passion. Home fires burning, as if her work were decorative, as if she were a necessity but not a participant. Maya had read that line 3 times, looking for herself in the story of a life she'd helped build. And each time she felt something cold and small settle a little deeper in her chest. She said nothing. What would she say? Demand credit? Prove her value? It felt petty. The kind of thing someone insecure would do. Maya knew her worth. She didn't need a magazine to confirm it. Except she was starting to suspect that if no one else ever confirmed it, if her contributions were always absorbed into someone else's narrative, then maybe her worth was only theoretical. A truth that existed in private but disappeared in public. The kind of truth that didn't actually change anything. And then Simone came home. Not for a visit. Home. Simone, with her master's degree in historic preservation and her father's sharp spatial intelligence, tired of corporate projects that prioritize developers over integrity, she wanted to do meaningful work. She wanted to work with her father. And Colin, who had spent years trying to make up for the time after the divorce when he'd been more absent than present, said yes before Simone finished asking. Of course, yes. He'd make her a partner. They'd build a legacy together. The Thornhill name on work that would outlast them both. Maya had been happy for them. She had. This was what she'd worked toward, wasn't it? Simone and Colin finally having the relationship they deserved. A relationship Maya had helped nurture through years of careful translation and space. Holding. Simone moved into the guest room. Temporarily, she said. Just until she found her own place. Got her bearings. Saved some money. Maya had said, of course. This was Simone's family home. Maya was the one who had arrived later. It made sense that Simone would need time. What Maya hadn't expected was how completely Simone would occupy that time and space. How quickly the dinner table conversations shifted to project updates and design challenges that Colin engaged with, like a man starving for exactly this kind of intellectual partnership. How Simone's presence changed the rhythm of the house, meals at different times because they were both working late, inside jokes from the job site, a shared vocabulary of architectural terms and historical references that Maya could follow, but never quite speak fluently. The questions Colin used to ask Maya, "What do you think? Does this make sense? Am I missing something?" started being asked across the drafting table to Simone instead. Simone wasn't unkind. She thanked Maya for dinner, asked about her day, complimented changes Maya made to the house. But there was a quality to the gratitude that made Maya feel less like family and more like service, a politeness that kept distance. And in the space where Maya had been Colin's primary thought partner, Simone settled with the easy confidence of someone reclaiming what had always belonged to them. Maya told herself she was overreacting, being petty, maybe even jealous in a way that embarrassed her. This was natural, father and daughter working together, building the closeness the divorce had interrupted. Maya should be glad. She was glad. But the replacements kept happening, so quietly they were almost deniable. Colin stopped asking Maya to review his client proposals because Simone handled communication now. The color-coded calendar Maya had maintained for years became redundant. Simone had implemented a firm, wide scheduling system. The relationships Maya had spent years building with historical societies and preservation boards were still active, but now Simone was the one maintaining them. sending the emails, making the calls, showing up at the meetings. When the preservation board president Maya had cultivated for half a decade sent a gift basket to the house, it was addressed to Simone. Thank you for your thoughtful correspondence and fresh perspective. Maya stood in the kitchen holding the card and tried to remember the last time she'd received direct acknowledgement for work she'd done. Not thank you for dinner acknowledgement. Not, you're so supportive acknowledgement. But recognition for her actual labor, her strategy, her mind. She couldn't. The hollow in her chest, the one that had been small and ignorable, grew larger. Maya started to have more free time than she'd had in years. Time that should have felt like relief but instead felt like evidence. Evidence that the systems she'd built ran fine without her. That her presence had become optional. That she was appreciated the way you appreciate a helpful appliance. Nice to have, but replaceable if it breaks. She filled the time as best she could. Took on more hours at the Historical Society. Started a garden. Organized closets that didn't need organizing. But in the evenings, when Colin and Simone sat together reviewing blueprints, their heads bent close in the warm light, speaking the private language of their shared work, Maya felt like a guest, a tolerated presence, valued for her contributions to the general pleasantness of the household, but no longer necessary for anything that actually mattered. And still, she said nothing. Because what was there to say? Colin hadn't betrayed her. Simone hadn't wronged her. This was just life. Shifting and adjusting. Roles changed. Families evolved. Maya had chosen patience as her governing principle. She could be patient through this too. The cost of that silence was a growing suspicion that she had mistaken patience for power, when really it had been something closer to erasure in slow motion. The night Maya heard the conversation through the wall, she had been bringing Colin tea. A small gesture, the kind of thing she'd done 1,000 times, noticing he'd been working late, anticipating that he might want something warm, showing up with it before he had to ask. It was her specialty, that kind of attention, the invisible work of noticing and responding, of making other people's lives smoother without requiring acknowledgement. She'd been halfway up the stairs when she heard her name. Maya's been wonderful, Colin was saying, his voice warm with the kind of affection that made the next part worse. But let's be honest, she's never really understood the technical side. This is family legacy work. Maya stopped. Her hand tightened on the mug. Simone's voice, measured and reasonable. I just think we need to be realistic about the partnership structure now. I don't want to hurt her feelings, but she's not really... she's been supportive, but the business itself... I know, Colin said. You're right, we should formalize it, just you and me. We can keep her involved in the admin side if she wants, but the decision-making, the creative work, that's ours. Ours. As if the foundation Maya had built, the relationships she'd cultivated, the systems she'd designed to make Colin's brilliance sustainable, as if none of that was creative work. As if supporting the structure wasn't part of building it. Maya stood in the hallway and listened to them discuss how to gently manage her feelings while erasing her contributions. They weren't cruel. They weren't even dismissive. Not really. They just genuinely believed that what Maya had done was adjacent to the real work. Helpful? Sure. Appreciated? Definitely. But not essential. Not the kind of thing that earned partnership or credit, or a seat at the table when decisions were made. They thought she was background music. Pleasant, but not the song itself. Maya didn't knock on the door. Didn't interrupt. Didn't announce that she'd heard every word. She turned around, walked back downstairs, poured the tea down the sink, and sat in the dark kitchen until her heartbeat steadied and her thoughts cleared. She had a choice to make. She could pretend she hadn't heard. Let them have their conversation. Formalize their partnership. Continue being the gracious support system they'd rewritten her as. She could keep showing up, keep contributing, keep being patient, and hope that eventually someone would notice the shape of the hole she'd leave if she ever stopped. Or she could pay attention. Real attention. Not to what they needed, but to what was actually happening. To the pattern of quiet replacement, of credit reassignment, of narrative erasure. She could stop filling the gaps and start documenting them. Stop anticipating their needs and start calculating her own position. Maya had spent 17 years building other people's structures. She knew how foundations worked, how weight distributed, how to identify load-bearing elements and cosmetic facades. She was about to find out if they knew the difference. In the days after overhearing that conversation, Maya did something she'd never done before. She watched her own life like an outsider. She didn't change her behavior, still cooked meals, still managed the household, still showed up with the same pleasant efficiency she always had. But inside, she was taking inventory, documenting, seeing her contributions not as acts of love or partnership, but as data. And the data told a story Colin and Simone didn't seem to realize they were writing. 3 weeks after the through-the-wall conversation, Maya watched the first major example unfold at dinner. A longtime board member from the State Preservation Council, a woman named Margaret whom Maya had been corresponding with for 6 years, sent an email addressed to Simone. In it, Margaret thanked Simone for her continued dedication to institutional partnership and mentioned how much she valued their ongoing dialogue about regional preservation priorities. Maya had initiated that relationship, had sustained it through handwritten notes after every quarterly meeting, through thoughtful articles sent when something reminded her of Margaret's interests, through the kind of patient attention that turned professional contacts into genuine connections. For 6 years. Simone read the email aloud at dinner, pleased. "Margaret's really great," she said. "We've been talking about coordinating on the rural initiative." Colin nodded, proud. "You've done excellent relationship-building work." Maya, cutting vegetables at the counter, said nothing. But she opened her phone later that night and forwarded herself the entire email chain with Margaret. Every message, every note. All of them from Maya's account, dating back more than half a decade, until 6 months ago when Simone started CCing herself and eventually taking over the thread entirely. Evidence. Not for confrontation, just for clarity. So Maya could see, in concrete terms, what was happening. How her work was being absorbed. How her relationships were being inherited without acknowledgement. How the narrative was being rewritten in real time. She started doing that with everything. Quietly forwarding herself emails. Downloading files from shared drives. Taking screenshots of old calendar entries that showed her organizing meetings. Drafting proposals, coordinating schedules. Not to build a case for some dramatic courtroom moment. Just to have proof. Proof that she wasn't imagining it. That her contributions had been real, specific, and substantial. That if they disappeared from the story, it was because someone had erased them, not because they'd never existed. The second example came 2 weeks later. Colin was preparing a major proposal for a downtown revitalization project, the kind of contract that could define the next phase of his firm's reputation. The proposal required not just architectural vision but strategic positioning, understanding the city's political landscape, knowing which council members cared about historical integrity versus economic development, framing the project in language that spoke to community values. Maya had coached Colin through a dozen proposals like this. She knew how to translate his technical brilliance into narratives that made decision-makers feel like preservation was their idea, not an imposition. This time, Colin worked on the proposal with Simone. They sat at the dining table for 3 evenings, laptops open, talking through framing and emphasis. Maya brought them coffee, cleared their plates, and listened. When Colin practiced his pitch, Simone gave feedback. Maybe lead with the economic impact, show them the ROI on preservation? Colin nodded, adjusting his notes. Maya, loading the dishwasher, spoke quietly. Councilmember Chen is the swing vote. She cares about legacy more than ROI. If you lead with economics, you'll lose her in the first 2 minutes. Colin looked up. You think? She said it in every public meeting for the last 3 years. Development proposals that start with money get her automatic skepticism. But if you start with what this building has meant to the neighborhood, what it could mean to her grandchildren, she'll listen. Simone frowned slightly. That feels kind of manipulative. Maya met her eyes, her voice still calm. It's not manipulation to speak to someone's values. It's respect. Colin made a note. Good point. I'll adjust the opening. Simone returned to her laptop, and the moment passed. But Maya noticed that when Colin delivered the pitch the following week, he used her framing. Led with legacy, not economics. And when he called to say they'd won the contract, he thanked Simone for her strategic input, told Maya the dinner she'd prepared for the celebration was perfect, and never mentioned whose advice had actually shaped the winning approach. Maya smiled and said she was glad it had gone well. Then she went upstairs and added another note to the file she was quietly building. Not with anger. With clarity. The third example was the one that made Maya realize this wasn't just oversight, it was a system. Simone started redecorating. It began small, a new lamp in the living room, a different arrangement of the bookshelves. Then it escalated. Simone suggested they repaint the dining room, replace the curtains in the study, move furniture to open up the space. She talked about it like it was a collaborative home improvement project, but she never actually asked Maya's opinion. She'd say things like, "I was thinking we could move this," or "Wouldn't it be great if we updated that?" and then proceed as if Maya's silence was agreement. Colin went along with it. He seemed pleased even that Simone was investing in the house, making it feel like home. The house Maya had been running for 17 years. The home she had created, maintained, and filled with the kind of invisible attention that made it comfortable without anyone noticing why. One afternoon, Maya came home from the Historical Society to find Simone rearranging the kitchen. Cabinets were open, contents spread across the counter. "I hope you don't mind," Simone said, not looking up. "I'm reorganizing. The current system doesn't make much sense." Maya stood in the doorway of her own kitchen and watched her daughter-in-law move dishes to different shelves, consolidate pantry items, relocate utensils. The system Simone was dismantling was one Maya had designed, organized by frequency of use, by workflow, by the logic of someone who actually cooked in that space daily. "Simone," Maya said quietly. Simone turned, holding a stack of plates. "That's where I keep those." "Oh, I just thought, here makes more sense. Closer to the dishwasher." "I keep them there because that's where I need them when I'm plating meals. The dishwasher proximity doesn't matter if I'm carrying them 6 extra feet every time I serve dinner." Simone blinked. For a moment, something flickered across her face. Maybe recognition, maybe irritation. Then she smiled. "Sure, I'll put them back. I was just trying to help." She returned the plates to their original cabinet. But she didn't put back the glasses, the mixing bowls, the utensils, and when Maya started to say something else, Simone's phone rang. She answered it, walked out of the kitchen still talking, and left Maya standing there surrounded by the reorganized contents of her own space. That night, Maya didn't put everything back. She left it. Partly because she was tired. Partly because she wanted to see if Simone would notice that the new arrangement didn't actually work, that within a week she'd be reaching for things that weren't where muscle memory expected them to be. But mostly, Maya left it because she was beginning to understand something she hadn't wanted to see. Simone wasn't trying to share the house. She was trying to reclaim it, to make it hers in a way that required erasing the systems Maya had built, even if those systems worked better. Especially if they worked better. Because if Simone acknowledged that Maya's way of organizing the kitchen was more functional, she'd have to acknowledge that Maya had built something with thought and intention, that Maya's contributions were intelligent, not just helpful, that this was Maya's home, not just a space Maya had been allowed to occupy. And acknowledging that would complicate the narrative Simone and Colin were constructing, that this business, this house, this family was theirs, father and daughter, blood and legacy, and Maya was adjacent to it. Appreciated, sure, even loved, but not foundational, not irreplaceable. Maya stood in her rearranged kitchen and felt the weight of her own patience pressing down on her. 17 years of not demanding credit, of assuming her value was obvious, of believing that quiet, steady contribution would eventually be recognized. But what if it wouldn't? What if patience without boundaries wasn't strength? It was just permission for other people to rewrite you out of your own story. A month after overhearing the conversation through the wall, Maya stopped offering unsolicited help. She didn't announce it, didn't make a speech about boundaries or respect. She just stopped doing the invisible work that had made her essential without making her visible. Colin mentioned a scheduling conflict with a client meeting and a site visit. Normally, Maya would have suggested a solution, reorganized his calendar, contacted the client to reschedule. This time, she just nodded. "That's tricky," she said, and returned to her book. Colin solved it himself. It took him 3 phone calls and some awkward negotiating, but he managed. Simone mentioned needing to follow up with a preservation board, but couldn't remember the contact person's name. Usually, Maya would have supplied it. She knew every board member, their preferences, their communication styles. This time, Maya said, "I think the directory is on the website," and continued chopping vegetables for dinner. Simone found the information herself. It took longer, and she got the contact hierarchy slightly wrong, but she figured it out. Maya watched these small struggles with a strange mixture of emotions. Not satisfaction exactly. Certainly not vindication. More like confirmation. They could function without her. They just had to work harder, think more, anticipate less. The infrastructure she'd built was convenient, but it wasn't irreplaceable. Or at least, they didn't think it was. The question Maya was beginning to ask herself was whether convenience was all she'd ever been to them. A system that ran so smoothly they'd stopped noticing it was running at all. 6 weeks after the through-the-wall conversation, Colin and Simone announced their plan to formalize the partnership. They did it at dinner, presenting it like good news. Simone would become a named partner. The firm would officially be Thornhill and Thornhill. They'd drawn up papers, consulted an attorney, worked out the equity structure. Colin looked at Maya with genuine warmth. "We wanted you to be the first to know." Maya set down her fork. "That's wonderful. Congratulations." Simone smiled. "We're really excited. It feels like the business is finally becoming what it was always meant to be." Maya heard the unspoken end of that sentence. A family business. A legacy between father and daughter. She heard it, and she understood that in their story, she had never been part of that legacy. She had been a supporting character. Helpful to the plot, but not central to it. "When does it become official?" Maya asked. Her voice was calm, curious even. "Next month," Colin said. "We'll have a small reception. Make the announcement. Nothing too formal. Will you invite the preservation boards, the institutional partners?" Colin and Simone exchanged a glance. "Probably not for the partnership announcement itself," Simone said. "Maybe a separate event later for clients and partners." Maya nodded slowly. "That makes sense." She saw the relief on their faces. They'd been worried, maybe, that she'd be hurt, or jealous, or that she'd demand some recognition, some role in the formalization. Instead, she was gracious, supportive, exactly what they'd expected. What they didn't see was that Maya's calm was not acceptance. It was observation. She was watching them build a structure on a foundation they didn't realize she'd poured. And she was beginning to wonder what would happen when they finally understood where the weight was actually resting. "I'm happy for you both," Maya said. And in a strange way, she meant it. She was happy they had each other, happy they'd found their partnership. She just wasn't willing to disappear so they could have it. 2 weeks before the partnership was set to be formalized, the firm got the call. They'd been selected for the State Preservation Fund contract, a massive career-defining project worth substantial money and significant prestige, the kind of opportunity that came once in a career, if at all. Colin and Simone were ecstatic. They celebrated with champagne, called colleagues, started planning the work. It was validation. Proof that the firm was ascending, that the father-daughter partnership was not just sentimental but strategically sound. But 3 days before the application deadline, reality intruded. Maya was in the kitchen when she heard the panic in Colin's voice from the other room. She walked to the doorway of the dining room where Colin and Simone were surrounded by papers, both of them looking at a laptop screen with identical expressions of dismay. "What's wrong?" Maya asked. Colin looked up. "The application requires documentation we don't have easily accessible. Letters of recommendation from institutional partners, financial records going back 10 years, proof of sustained community engagement." Simone scrolled through the requirements. "We have the technical proposal, but all this relational and organizational documentation, I don't even know where half of this is." Maya leaned against the doorframe. "What specifically do you need?" Colin rattled off a list. Contact information for board members who could write letters on short notice, financial records that proved organizational stability, evidence of long-term community partnerships. Maya listened. Every item on that list was something she had created, maintained, or owned. The relationships were hers. The filing system was hers. The community engagement was her work. She could have said that. Could have pointed out, in this moment of need, that they were asking her for the foundation she'd built while they were planning to formalize a partnership that erased her from the structure. Instead, she walked to her home office, opened her meticulously organized files, and began pulling what they needed. Letters of recommendation. Maya sent messages to 5 board members she'd cultivated relationships with over the years, not asking them to lie, just asking them to write honestly about their experience with the firm. 4 of them responded within hours. All of them addressed their letters to Maya, praising her specifically for relationship building, institutional partnership, and sustained engagement. Financial records. Maya had implemented a digital filing system in year 3 of Colin's business. Every receipt, every contract, every record of income and expense, organized by year and category. She exported 10 years of documentation in under an hour. Community engagement. Maya provided calendar records of meetings she'd organized, correspondence she'd maintained, events she'd coordinated. A decade of proof that the firm had been an active, consistent presence in the preservation community. She handed it all to Colin and Simone without commentary. Just set the files on the table and said, "This should cover it." Colin stared at the documents. "Maya, this is... How do you have all of this?" "I built the system. I've been maintaining it." Simone looked through the letters of recommendation, and her expression shifted. "These are all addressed to you. They're the people I've been working with. They know me." A silence settled over the room. Not hostile, but heavy. The weight of realization beginning to press against the narrative they'd been telling themselves. Colin's voice was quieter. "We couldn't have done this without you." Maya met his eyes. "No, you couldn't have." It wasn't said with anger. It was just fact. And the truth of it sat there between them, undeniable. Simone recovered first. "Well, thank you. This is really helpful. We'll make sure to include it in the application," Maya finished. "I know." She left them there and went back to her office. Closed the door. Sat at her desk and felt the shift happening, not dramatic, not explosive. Just the slow, inevitable movement of weight finding its true resting place. They'd asked her for help, and she'd given it. But she hadn't given it as invisible infrastructure this time. She'd given it as named contribution. As evidence that the foundation they were standing on had her name on it, whether or not they'd bothered to read the inscription. They submitted the application. They won the contract. And Maya began to understand that information asymmetry wasn't just knowing things other people didn't know. It was knowing the value of what you knew and waiting for the moment when that value became undeniable. The reception was scheduled for a Thursday evening. A celebration hosted by the State Preservation Fund, honoring all the firms selected for major contracts. Press would be there. Institutional leaders. Colleagues from across the region. It was the kind of event where reputations were built and professional futures were shaped. Colin and Simone prepared for it like a campaign. They coordinated their remarks, planned how to introduce themselves, strategized which connections to prioritize. They talked about it at dinner for a week, refining their approach, anticipating questions. 3 days before the event, Simone said to Maya almost casually, "You don't have to come if you don't want to. I know these industry things can be kind of boring." Maya looked up from her plate. "Why would I not want to come?" Simone shrugged, not quite meeting her eyes. "It's pretty technical, lots of architecture talk. I just thought you might be more comfortable." "I'll be there," Maya said. Her voice was calm, but there was something in it that made Simone stop talking. Colin, sensing tension, spoke carefully. "Of course you're welcome, Maya. We'd love to have you." "Have you?" As if her presence were a guest favor, not a right. Maya smiled. "I'll be there," she repeated. The reception was held in a restored historical building downtown, the kind of space that proved the value of preservation just by existing. High ceilings, original woodwork, the bones of the past made beautiful and functional for the present. Maya wore a dress she'd bought for the occasion. Not flashy, but elegant. The kind of thing that made people look twice. Not because it demanded attention, but because it deserved it. She arrived with Colin and Simone but didn't stay attached to them. She let them work the room as a unit, father and daughter. The face of Thornhill and Thornhill. She stood near the tall windows, a glass of wine in hand, and watched. People approached Colin and Simone. Congratulations were exchanged. Business cards were traded. The room buzzed with the energy of success being celebrated and alliances being formed. Maya recognized most of the people there. Board members she'd corresponded with. Institutional partners she'd cultivated. Colleagues who'd worked with Colin over the years. Some of them glanced her way, a few offered polite nods, but mostly they focused on Colin and Simone, the official faces of the firm. Then Eleanor arrived. Eleanor Voss, director of the State Preservation Fund, early 60s, silver hair cut sharp, the kind of presence that made rooms quiet down when she spoke. She'd been in preservation work for 30 years and had a reputation for seeing through professional performance to actual substance. Maya had met her exactly twice, both times briefly at events years ago. But they'd corresponded regularly. Maya had made a point of reading Eleanor's published articles, sending thoughtful responses, asking questions that showed genuine engagement with her ideas. Not networking in the transactional sense, just the kind of attention Maya gave to people whose work she respected. Eleanor moved to the podium. The room settled. She welcomed everyone, congratulated the selected firms, spoke about the importance of preservation not just as technical work but as community trust. Then she shifted. I want to take a moment to acknowledge someone whose work made many of these partnerships possible. Maya's attention sharpened. Institutional relationships aren't built overnight, Eleanor continued. They're built through consistent, thoughtful engagement, through someone taking the time to understand not just what we do, but why it matters, through correspondence that goes beyond transaction to genuine connection. Eleanor's eyes moved across the room and landed on Maya. Maya Thornhill has been that person for more than a decade. Her quarterly updates, her thoughtful questions, her ability to see where institutional priorities and project possibilities align, that's the kind of work that makes collaboration possible. When we were reviewing applications, Maya's name came up again and again, not as a footnote, but as a reason to trust that this firm understands partnership. The room turned. Faces Maya had seen glance past her moments ago now looked at her directly. Colin's expression was stunned. Simone's face showed confusion, then something harder to name. Discomfort, maybe, or the first edge of understanding. Eleanor smiled at Maya. Thank you for setting a standard the rest of us are still trying to meet. Applause filled the room. Not polite reception clapping. Real acknowledgement. Maya nodded once, gracious but brief. She didn't walk to the podium. Didn't make a speech. Just stood there, visible, while the room recognized what Colin and Simone had been systematically erasing. Eleanor continued with her remarks, but Maya barely heard them. She was watching Colin, watching Simone, watching the moment they realized that the foundation they'd been standing on had a name. Her name. And that the people who mattered in this industry knew it, whether or not the partnership papers did. After Eleanor's remarks, the social dynamic of the room shifted. Board members approached Maya directly. Not to make polite small talk, but to engage with her as a colleague. They asked her opinion on upcoming initiatives, invited her to advisory meetings, treated her like someone whose perspective had weight. Margaret, the preservation board member whose relationship Simone had inherited, found Maya near the refreshments. Maya, it's so good to see you in person. I've missed our correspondence. Maya smiled. I've missed it too. Simone mentioned you'd stepped back from some of the firm work. I hope that doesn't mean we won't be hearing from you. I'm exploring some independent consulting, Maya said. Institutional partnership strategy. Relationship building for preservation organizations. Margaret's face lit up. That's exactly what the field needs. Let's set up a time to talk. I'd love to bring you in on some of our board planning. They exchanged contact information, made actual plans. And as Margaret walked away, Maya felt something she hadn't felt in months, seen. Not as someone's wife or someone's support system, but as herself. As someone with expertise, insight, and value that existed independent of whose story she appeared in. Across the room, Colin was trying to focus on a conversation with a fellow architect, but his eyes kept drifting to Maya, watching her talk with ease to people he'd thought of as his professional contacts. Realizing, maybe for the first time, that many of those contacts were actually hers. Simone stood slightly apart, holding a glass of wine she wasn't drinking, looking like someone who'd just discovered the map she'd been using was missing major landmarks. The drive home was silent. Colin gripped the steering wheel, his jaw tight. Simone stared out the window. Maya sat in the back seat, calm, looking at the city lights passing by. When they got home, Colin went straight to his office. Simone mumbled something about being tired and went upstairs. Maya poured herself a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, the kitchen Simone had tried to reorganize, and let the silence settle. She'd been silent for so long. Strategic silence, patient silence, the silence of someone watching and waiting and accumulating information. But tonight, that silence had been broken. Not by her, by someone else who'd seen her work and named it publicly, who'd given her credit in front of the people who mattered, in a context where her contributions couldn't be dismissed as background support. The silence that had made Colin and Simone underestimate her was beginning to mean something very different now. It was beginning to mean trouble. The morning after the reception, Maya woke before sunrise. She made coffee in the kitchen that still bore traces of Simone's reorganization and sat at the table watching the sky change colors. She heard Colin moving around upstairs, the familiar sounds of him getting ready for the day. But this morning, the sounds felt different, heavier somehow. Like he was carrying weight he hadn't known was there. He came downstairs just after 6. He looked like he hadn't slept. When he saw Maya at the table, he stopped in the doorway. "Can we talk?" he said. Maya nodded toward the chair across from her. Colin sat. He wrapped his hands around the coffee mug Maya had already poured for him. An old habit. She'd been pouring his coffee for 17 years, anticipating when he'd come downstairs, how he'd take it. Small, invisible work that added up to a life. "I didn't realize," Colin said. His voice was rough. "Last night, hearing Eleanor talk about you, watching people approach you like that, I didn't realize how much of our success was built on your work." Maya sipped her coffee. She didn't rush to fill his silence with reassurance. Didn't tell him it was okay, that she understood. She just waited. "Why didn't you say anything?" Colin asked. "Why did you let us go forward with the partnership plans? Let Simone take over your relationships. Let me talk about the business like it was just mine and hers. Why didn't you tell me what was happening?" Maya set down her cup. "I did tell you," she said. "Not all at once. Not in a confrontation. But I told you in small ways, over months. The problem is that hearing me would have required you to change the story you were telling yourself. And that story was more comfortable than the truth." Colin flinched. "That's not fair, isn't it?" Maya's voice was calm, factual. "When you talked about building the business through difficult years after your divorce, did you mention that I built the systems that made it sustainable? When you introduced Simone as your new partner, did you acknowledge that she was stepping into infrastructure I created? When clients praised your firm's relationships, did you ever say those relationships had my name on them?" Colin was quiet. "I'm not angry," Maya continued, "but I need you to understand what's been happening. I've been quietly replaced in a life I built. Not loudly, not cruelly, just erased piece by piece, until the only role left for me was the one that didn't require acknowledgement, the supportive wife, the woman who keeps the home fires burning." She said those last words with a slight edge. Colin recognized the phrase from the magazine article, the one that had reduced her to atmosphere. "I heard you," Maya said, "through the wall, 6 weeks ago. You and Simone talking about formalizing the partnership, about how I've been wonderful but I don't really understand the technical side, about how this is family legacy work." Colin's face went pale. "Maya, I stood in the hallway with your tea getting cold in my hands, and I listened to you both discuss how to manage my feelings while writing me out of the narrative. And I made a choice in that moment. Not to explode, not to confront, but to pay attention, to see clearly what was happening and decide what I was going to do about it." "What are you going to do about it?" Colin asked. His voice was small. Maya looked at him, at this man she'd loved, supported, built a life with, at the person who'd seen her as essential in private but optional in public, at the partner who'd let his daughter quietly replace her because it was easier than defending Maya's place. "I'm going to stop being invisible," she said. The words hung in the air between them. Simple. Absolute. Colin leaned forward. "I don't want you to be invisible. I never wanted that. He stopped, struggling. "I got used to you being there, making everything work. I stopped seeing it as work. I started seeing it as just who you are. Patient. Supportive. Not needing recognition because you were above that somehow." Maya shook her head slowly. "I'm not above needing recognition, Colin. I'm a human being who contributed substantially to building something, and I need that contribution to be visible. Not just to you in private, when you're thanking me for being supportive, but in public? In the story you tell about your life, in the structure of the business, in the way you introduce me to colleagues." Colin ran his hands through his hair. "What can I do? Tell me what you need." Maya considered that. 3 months ago she might have given him a list, specific actions he could take to make this right. But she'd spent 6 weeks watching, documenting, understanding the pattern, and she'd learned something crucial about herself. She didn't want to give Colin instructions on how to see her. She wanted him to see her because her contributions were undeniable. Because the truth was too obvious to ignore. "I need you to look at the actual structure of your success and tell me what you see," Maya said. "Not what you want to see. Not what's comfortable. What's actually there." She stood. walked to her home office, and returned with a folder. She set it on the table in front of Colin. He opened it slowly. Inside were printed emails, calendar entries, financial records, letters of recommendation, documentation of 10 years of work. Maya's work, every client relationship she'd initiated, every proposal she'd shaped, every system she'd built, every crisis she'd quietly solved while Colin got credit for the resolution. Colin read through the pages, and Maya watched his face change. Watched him see, maybe for the first time, the full scope of what she'd done, the architecture of invisible labor that had held his visible success in place. "This is," Colin started, then stopped. "This is everything." "Not everything," Maya said. "Just the parts I could document. The parts that leave evidence. There's a whole other category of work that doesn't. The emotional labor, the anticipation, the noticing and responding before anyone has to ask. That work doesn't show up in email chains, but it's just as real." Colin looked up at her, and there were tears in his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Maya. I'm so sorry. I took you for granted. I let Simone take you for granted. I built a story about my life that erased you, and I didn't even realize I was doing it." Maya sat back down. "I know you didn't realize it. That's part of the problem. My erasure was so smooth, so comfortable that it felt natural. Like the way things were supposed to be." "How do I fix this?" Colin said. Maya was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know if you can," she finally said. "I don't know if we add me back into a story I was erased from, or if I need to write a different story altogether." "Are you leaving me?" Colin asked. His voice cracked. "I don't know yet," Maya said. And that was the truth. She didn't know. She knew she loved him. She knew she'd built a life with him that had mattered deeply, but she also knew she couldn't go back to being invisible. And she wasn't sure if Colin could actually change enough to make her visible in the ways that mattered. The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted them. Simone appeared in the doorway, still in pajamas, her hair uncombed. She looked between Maya and Colin, saw the folder on the table, and seemed to understand that she'd walked into something significant. "I should go," Simone said. "No," Maya said. "You should hear this too." Simone hesitated, then sat down at the table. She looked younger than 26. Uncertain in a way Maya hadn't seen before, Maya slid the folder towards Simone. "Your father and I have been talking about the structure of the business, about who built what. I'd like you to look at this." Simone pulled the folder toward her and began reading. Maya watched her face as she went through the documentation, saw the moment Simone recognized her own name in email chains that Maya had initiated, saw her understand that relationships she'd thought she'd built had actually been inherited, saw the discomfort of realizing that the legacy she'd claimed had someone else's foundation. When Simone looked up, her expression was complicated, defensive, but also something else. Something that might have been shame. "I didn't know," Simone said. "You didn't ask," Maya replied. Not unkindly, but clearly. "You assumed. You saw the business as your father's creation, saw this house as your family home, saw me as someone who'd been helpful but not foundational, and you built your understanding on those assumptions without checking if they were true." Simone's jaw tightened. "I never tried to erase you." "You didn't have to try," Maya said. "Erasure doesn't require intention. It just requires not paying attention, not seeing someone's work, not asking questions about who built the systems you're benefiting from." Simone looked at Colin, as if hoping he'd defend her. But Colin was staring at the folder, his face heavy with recognition. "I thought I was just stepping into my legacy," Simone said. Her voice was smaller now. "My dad's business, my family home. I didn't think about it as taking something from you." "That's the problem," Maya said. "You didn't think about me at all. I was just there, part of the background. And when you needed something I'd built, you took it without acknowledging where it came from." Simone was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "So what happens now? You want an apology. You want us to add you to the partnership." "What?" Maya leaned back in her chair. "I've been offered a position on an advisory board. I'm going to accept it. I'm also going to be stepping back from the firm's daily operations, not out of anger, but because I need to invest in work where my contributions are visible from the start, not retroactively acknowledged after someone else points them out." Colin started to protest. "We need you, Maya. The business needs you." "No," Maya said. "You need the work I do. But you've been telling yourselves and everyone else that you don't. That it's your business, your legacy, your success. So now you'll have the chance to find out if that's true. You're punishing us, Simone said. There was an edge in her voice. I'm setting a boundary, Maya corrected. There's a difference. Punishment would be sabotaging you. Telling your clients what happened. Damaging your reputation. I'm not doing any of that. I'm just refusing to continue being erased. Simone stood up abruptly. I didn't erase you. I'm not responsible for your feelings of invisibility. Maya met her eyes. You're right. You're not responsible for my feelings. But you are responsible for your actions. And your actions included taking credit for relationships I built, dismissing my understanding of the work, and treating my home like it was yours to reclaim. Those aren't feelings. Those are facts. Simone opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. She looked at the folder again, at the evidence of Maya's work spread across the table. Then she turned and walked out of the kitchen. A moment later, Maya heard her footsteps on the stairs, the sound of her bedroom door closing. Colin and Maya sat in the silence Simone left behind. She's not wrong that this feels like punishment, Colin said quietly. I know, Maya said, because you're both used to my patience being infinite, used to me absorbing the cost of your comfort. But patience without boundaries isn't virtue. It's self-erasure. And I'm done erasing myself. Colin reached across the table like he was going to take Maya's hand, then stopped. What do you need from me? He asked again. Time, Maya said. Space. And evidence that you understand what happened here. Not just that you feel bad about it, but that you actually see the pattern and are willing to do the work to change it. I'll do anything, Colin said. Maya looked at him. The man she'd loved. The man she'd built a life with. The man who'd let her disappear because it was easier than making her visible. Then start by telling the truth, she said. The next time someone asks you about your success, tell them the whole story. The part with me in it. The part where the systems that made your brilliance sustainable were built by someone else. The part where your legacy has two names on it, whether or not the partnership papers acknowledge that. Colin nodded. He was crying now, quietly, but he didn't look away from her. I will, he said. I promise. I will. Maya didn't know if she believed him yet, but she knew the conversation had shifted something. The truth was out now. Visible. Named. And whatever happened next would have to be built on that truth, not the comfortable fiction they'd all been living in. She stood up. I'm going to my office, she said. I have work to do. Colin watched her go. And for the first time in their marriage, he didn't ask her for help managing his day. 6 weeks passed. Maya moved through them with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. She accepted the advisory board position formally. She began consulting independently with preservation organizations, teaching them how to build the kind of institutional relationships that lasted. The work was hers. Entirely hers. Her name on it from the beginning. Her expertise recognized without having to be filtered through someone else's narrative. She moved some of her things to a small apartment across town. Not all of them. Not permanently. But enough that she had a space that was only hers. A place where she could work without the constant presence of people who'd erased her. A place where the kitchen was organized exactly how she wanted it. And no one reorganized it without asking. Colin tried. She had to give him that. He started crediting her in professional contexts. When colleagues asked about the firm's success, he talked about the systems Maya had built, the relationships she'd maintained. It was awkward at first. He'd spent so long telling the self-made man story that correcting it felt like dismantling part of his identity. But he did it anyway. Simone was slower to change. She hired an operations manager to handle the work Maya had done, and the learning curve was steep. The new manager was competent, but she didn't have Maya's institutional knowledge, didn't have the relationships Maya had spent years cultivating. Things that had run smoothly began to require more effort, more time, more explicit management. And Simone began to understand gradually and uncomfortably how much labor Maya had performed invisibly. 3 months after the reception, Simone sent Maya a message asking if they could meet for coffee. Maya agreed. They met at a cafe downtown, neutral territory, on a Saturday morning. Simone was already there when Maya arrived. She looked tired. She stood when Maya approached, and there was something different in the way she held herself. Less confident, more uncertain. "Thank you for coming," Simone said. They ordered coffee and sat by the window. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I've been thinking a lot," Simone finally said, "about what you said. About not paying attention. About taking things without acknowledging where they came from." Maya listened. She didn't make it easier by reassuring Simone or filling the silence. She just waited. "I built this story about my dad," Simone continued, "about him being this self-made man who overcame his divorce and built something great through sheer determination. It was a good story. It made me proud. And when I joined the firm, I wanted to be part of that story. I wanted to prove that I belonged in it." She paused. "Acknowledging your role meant acknowledging that the story was incomplete. That my dad's success wasn't just his. That I was inheriting stability I didn't earn. And that was..." She stopped. "That was hard. It's easier to erase someone than to share credit. I see that now." Maya watched her. This was the most vulnerable she'd ever seen Simone. The most honest. "I'm sorry," Simone said. "I'm sorry I chose easier. I'm sorry I didn't see you. I should have." Maya took a sip of her coffee. She let the apology sit for a moment before responding. "I appreciate that," Maya said. "And I believe you mean it. But I need you to understand that sorry isn't enough by itself. I need to see that you actually understand what happened and that you're willing to change how you operate." "What can I do?" Simone asked. "Start by acknowledging the truth," Maya said. "When you talk about the firm, when you describe its foundation, tell the whole story. Don't erase the parts that aren't convenient. Don't simplify the narrative by leaving out the people who did invisible work." Simone nodded. "Okay, I can do that." "And stop treating spaces like they're automatically yours," Maya continued. "The house, the business, the relationships. You don't reclaim them. You negotiate for them. You ask. You acknowledge that other people have built those spaces and you're asking to share them, not entitled to take them." Simone looked down at her coffee. "That's fair." Maya softened slightly. "I don't want to be your enemy, Simone. I've never wanted that. I helped raise you. I care about you. But I won't be invisible anymore. If you can accept that, we'll find our way." Simone looked up. "Can I ask you something?" Maya nodded. "Are you coming back?" Simone asked. "To the house? To my dad? To us?" "I don't know yet," Maya said. "And that's the truth. I love your father. I've built a life with him that mattered. But I can't go back to being the person I was. The one who accepted erasure because confronting it felt too hard. I need to know that the relationship can be different. That I can be visible in it. And I don't know yet if that's possible." Simone was quiet for a moment. "He misses you. He's trying to change. I can see it. Trying is good," Maya said. "But trying isn't the same as changed. I need to see sustained evidence that the pattern is actually different. That I'm not just being added back into a story I was erased from, but that the story itself has fundamentally shifted." They talked for another hour. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a beginning. A recognition that the relationship between them had to be rebuilt on different terms. Terms where Maya was visible. Where her work was acknowledged. Where she wasn't background but foreground. When they parted, Simone hugged her. Maya hugged back. Not with the warmth of before, but not with coldness either. With the careful acknowledgement of two people figuring out how to be family in a new way. The quarterly meeting of the Preservation Fund happened 3 months after the initial reception. It was held in a conference center downtown, institutional partners and funded contractors gathering to review progress and coordinate on upcoming initiatives. Maya attended in her advisory board capacity. She'd been asked to present on institutional relationship building strategies, to talk about how preservation organizations could cultivate the kind of sustained partnerships that made long-term work possible. She prepared carefully. Not because she was nervous, but because she wanted to do it well. This was her expertise, her work. The thing she'd been doing invisibly for years, now being asked for explicitly, publicly, with her name on it. Colin and Simone were also there. They were contractors on the funded project, required to attend and report on progress. The role reversal from the last event was even more pronounced now. Maya was at the leadership table. Colin and Simone were in the audience with other contractors. When Maya stood to present, the room quieted. Eleanor introduced her with the same warmth she'd shown at the reception. describing Maya as someone who'd set the standard for institutional partnership. Maya spoke for 20 minutes. She talked about the difference between transactional networking and genuine relationship building, about the importance of sustained attention, of learning what institutional partners actually care about rather than what you want them to care about the patience required to build trust and the systems needed to maintain it. She spoke clearly, authoritatively, without hedging or minimizing. This was her knowledge, her experience, and she presented it as such. The room listened with the kind of attention reserved for people who clearly know what they're talking about. Several institutional leaders took notes. A few nodded at specific points. And when Maya finished, the applause was immediate and genuine. Questions followed. Smart questions from people who'd been doing this work for years and recognized expertise when they heard it. Maya answered each one directly, specifically, drawing on examples from her own experience without needing to reference anyone else's authority. This was the crown moment. Not because Maya had defeated anyone or proven anyone wrong, but because she was finally undeniably publicly recognized as herself, as an authority in her own right, as someone whose knowledge and contribution existed independent of whose wife she was or whose household she managed. After the presentation, institutional leaders approached her, not to make small talk, but to engage seriously with her ideas, to ask if she'd consult with their organizations, to invite her to speak at upcoming conferences, to treat her like the expert she was. Margaret, the board member whose relationship Simone had inherited, pulled Maya aside. "That was exceptional," Margaret said. "We need to bring you in on our strategic planning. We've been struggling with exactly the kind of relationship degradation you were describing." "I'd be happy to help," Maya said. They made concrete plans, set a date, discussed scope and compensation. This wasn't a favor or volunteer work. This was Maya's professional expertise being valued and paid for. Across the room, Colin watched. He wasn't resentful exactly, but there was something in his expression that looked like grief. The grief of understanding what he'd had and hadn't valued, what he'd taken for granted until it was no longer freely given. Simone stood beside him, and her expression was different. Still uncomfortable, but also something that might have been respect. She was watching Maya command the room, and perhaps finally seeing her clearly. After the formal session ended, Colin approached Maya. Simone hung back slightly, giving them space. "You were incredible," Colin said. His voice was quiet. "Thank you," Maya said. "I've been working with an attorney," Colin continued. "I want to offer you a formal position with the firm. Appropriate compensation, titled recognition. Your name on everything you built." Maya looked at him. At this offer that 3 months ago she might have wanted desperately. But now, "I appreciate that," she said. "But I don't want to be retroactively added to something I was erased from. I'm building something new. Something where my presence is foundational by design, not corrected after the fact." Colin's face showed the impact of that. "What does that mean for us?" he asked. "For our marriage." Maya was quiet for a moment. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I know I can't be married to someone who sees me as optional. Someone who erases me in public even if he values me in private. I need visibility, not just in work, but in our life. In the way you talk about our marriage. In the way you make decisions. I need to matter in ways that are undeniable." "I want that too," Colin said. "I'm trying. I'm changing how I talk about the business, how I credit you, how I think about our partnership." "I know," Maya said. "And I see the effort. But effort isn't the same as change. I need to see sustained patterns. Not just you trying when you're reminded, but the truth becoming your default. The story you tell naturally, not the one you correct yourself into telling." "How long?" Colin asked. "How long do I have to prove that?" "I don't have a timeline," Maya said. "I just know I can't go back to being invisible. So either our relationship evolves into something where I'm visible, or it doesn't survive. And I'm okay with either outcome, because what I'm not okay with anymore is disappearing." Colin nodded. He looked older somehow. Tired, but also more present than he'd been in years. "I love you," he said. "I don't want to lose you." "Then see me," Maya said simply. "Really see me. All of me. The work I do, the expertise I have. The person I am when I'm not being supportive or patient or background. See that person and make space for her in your life. In our life. I'm trying, Colin said again. I know, Maya replied. And she did know. She could see him trying. Could see him struggling against years of habit and comfort. Could see the grief in him as he realized what he'd almost lost. But seeing him try wasn't the same as trusting that the change was permanent. And Maya had learned something crucial in these months of reclaiming herself. She didn't need to rush this. Didn't need to make it easier for him or faster for them. She could be patient about this too. Not the patient that erased herself, but the patient that held her ground and waited for the world to catch up. That evening, Maya returned to her apartment. The one that was just hers. She made tea in her perfectly organized kitchen and sat by the window watching the city lights come on. Her phone buzzed. A message from Eleanor asking if Maya would co-author an article on institutional relationship building for a preservation journal. Another message from Margaret confirming their consulting meeting. A third from a preservation organization 2 states away asking if Maya would speak at their annual conference. Work that was hers. Recognition that was hers. A professional identity that existed entirely separate from whose wife she was. Maya looked at the messages and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not just satisfaction or validation, though those were present. But wholeness. The sense of being a complete person, rather than a supporting character in someone else's story. She didn't know yet if her marriage would survive. Didn't know if Colin could actually sustain the changes he was trying to make. Didn't know if she and Simone would rebuild their relationship into something real, or if it would remain cordially distant. But she knew she would survive. Was surviving. Had survived a quiet replacement, the systematic erasure, the years of being essential but invisible. And she'd done it without destroying anyone. Without revenge or sabotage or burning anything down. She'd just stopped being silent about the truth. Had stopped accepting other people's versions of reality when they erased her. Had reclaimed her narrative not by demanding it loudly, but by refusing to continue supporting the false one. The title of her story had been written by other people for too long. The woman behind the man. The supportive wife. The helpful presence. Maya had rewritten it, and the new title was simply her name. Maya Thornhill. Expert in institutional relationship building. Advisor. Consultant. Authority in her own right. Not someone's wife, though she might still be that too. Not someone's stepmother, though that relationship might heal and grow. But first and foremost herself. Visible. Undeniable. Finally, permanently, seen. Here's what most people don't understand about patience. They think it's passive. They think it's waiting quietly while other people make decisions about your life. They think it's accepting whatever treatment comes your way because making noise would be uncomfortable, or demanding, or selfish. But real patience, the kind that holds power instead of surrendering it, is something different entirely. It's strategic. It's the ability to wait for the right moment while you gather information, build evidence, understand patterns. It's knowing when silence serves you and when it erases you. Maya's story isn't just about a woman who was erased and fought back. It's about understanding the difference between patience and self-erasure. Between supporting others and disappearing into their stories. Between being quiet because you're calculating and being quiet because you've accepted invisibility. Too many of us, especially those of us taught to be accommodating and supportive and selfless, mistake our own endurance for virtue. We think that if we just keep showing up, keep contributing, keep being patient, eventually our value will become obvious. Eventually people will notice. Eventually we'll be seen. But here's the hard truth. If your contributions are consistently absorbed into someone else's narrative, if you're credited privately but erased publicly, if people tell you you're essential while treating you as replaceable, then your patience isn't building power. It's enabling your own erasure. The question you have to ask yourself is this. Does your silence serve you, or does it serve the people who benefit from you staying quiet? Are you being strategically patient, waiting for the right moment to act from a position of strength? Or are you being passively patient, hoping that eventually someone else will decide you deserve recognition? Because those are very different things. Maya spent years being the second kind of patient. The kind that kept showing up, kept contributing, kept building other people's success, while telling herself that partnership didn't require scorekeeping. And she wasn't wrong that good relationships shouldn't be transactional. But she also learned that relationships can't be sustained when one person's contributions are systematically invisible. When she finally heard the truth through that wall, When she stood in the hallway and listened to the people she'd supported discuss her irrelevance, she made a choice: not to explode. Not to confront immediately, but to transform her patients from passive to strategic. She started paying attention differently, not to what they needed, but to what was actually happening. She documented. She observed patterns. She understood the full scope of what she'd built and what was being taken. And she waited, not because she was afraid to act, but because she knew that the right moment would give her more power than the immediate one. That's information asymmetry. Knowing things other people don't know you know. Seeing patterns other people don't realize you're tracking. And using that knowledge not to destroy them, but to protect yourself. If you're in a situation where you feel invisible, where your work is being absorbed into someone else's story, where your patience feels less like strength and more like disappearing, you have options. You can document your contributions the way Maya did. Keep records. Forward yourself emails. Screenshot evidence of your labor. Not because you're planning some dramatic exposure, but because you need to know clearly and specifically that you're not imagining it. You can observe patterns rather than reacting to individual incidents. One instance of not being credited might be oversight. A pattern of erasure is something else entirely. And seeing it as a pattern gives you clarity. You can practice strategic patience, not infinite patience. Not the kind that accepts erasure indefinitely, but the kind that waits for the moment when your truth becomes undeniable. And most importantly, you can set boundaries. You can stop doing the invisible work that lets other people pretend you're not essential. You can reclaim your narrative not by destroying theirs, but by refusing to continue supporting a false one. Maya didn't sabotage Colin or Simone. She didn't expose them publicly or damage their reputation. She just stopped allowing them to erase her. She stepped back from work that was being credited to others. She accepted opportunities that put her name front and center. She told the truth about what she'd built when people asked. And she let the natural consequences of that truth unfold. That's not revenge. That's justice. The refusal to accept harm as normal. If you're someone who's been quietly replaced, who's watched your contributions get absorbed into someone else's success story, who's been told you're valued while being treated as optional, I want you to hear this. Your work has value whether or not anyone acknowledges it. Your expertise is real whether or not it's publicly recognized. And you do not have to keep sacrificing your visibility to maintain other people's comfort. Reclaiming your narrative isn't selfish. Setting boundaries isn't cruel. Refusing to be erased isn't revenge. It's just the decision to be seen. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stop doing the work that lets people pretend you don't exist. Stop filling the gaps. Stop anticipating needs. Stop being the invisible infrastructure. Not forever necessarily, but long enough for people to understand what they had. Long enough for the truth to become undeniable. Your silence can mean trouble. But only if it's the kind of silence that's gathering evidence, building clarity, and waiting for the moment when your truth can't be ignored. Not the silence of erasure. The silence of strategy. And when you finally speak, when you finally allow yourself to be fully visible, you won't need to be loud. You'll just need to be clear. Because the truth, when it's specific and documented and undeniable, doesn't need volume. It just needs to be told. Maya's story ended with her standing in her own apartment, her name on her own work, her identity no longer filtered through someone else's narrative. She didn't know yet if her marriage would survive, but she knew she had survived. And that was the victory that mattered. Not destroying the people who erased her, not punishing them, just reclaiming herself, standing visible, being undeniable. That's the power that patience builds when it has boundaries, when it serves you instead of erasing you, when it's strategic instead of passive. And that's the power available to anyone willing to stop accepting invisibility as the price of peace. If Maya's story resonated with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own life, if you're learning what it means to set boundaries after years of patience, you're not alone. This channel, Silent Mind Stories, is dedicated to exploring exactly these moments, the quiet strength it takes to reclaim your narrative, the courage required to stop being erased, the dignity that comes from choosing yourself. These aren't stories about loud revenge or dramatic destruction. They're about the slow burn of self-respect, the power of strategic silence, the moment when patience transforms into something undeniable. If that speaks to you, subscribe to Silent Mind Stories. Join a community of people who understand that strength doesn't always announce itself, but it always, eventually, makes itself known. New stories every week. Real emotions. No shortcuts. Just the truth about what it takes to go from invisible to irreplaceable. Subscribe now. Your silence might mean trouble too. And that's exactly as it should be.